1976, the United States government officially rejected her gift, one of the greatest in the nation's history. They returned it all, calling her dream, her fortress, her immortality, nothing more than an exorbitant expense. This gift was paid for with a lie, with a fortune built on fear. Its treasures were bought for a pittance, at the bloody fire sale of a murdered empire. Her father didn't sell people a beverage. He sold them panic in newspaper ads, a technique that your social media has perfected today. But to understand why the wealthiest country in the world refused this palace, we must hear that single shot, the shot that started it all, and which she desperately tried to muffle her entire life with the walls of the most perfect house in America. There is no time here. The silence in these rooms is tangible. It presses down, settling on your shoulders like an invisible mantle of dust and regret. The air is thick, smelling of beeswax, old silk, and a power that has long outlived its owner. A ray of sunlight, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, cuts through the twilight, glides across the polished surface of a mahogany table, and stops on a teacup. Imperial porcelain. It sits as if the lady of the house just stepped away for a moment to give an order to the butler. But she will not return. Never. This house does not breathe. It holds a pause that has lasted for nearly half a century. Every object here is a soldier on eternal duty. The fork lies a millimeter from the knife. The portrait on the wall is aligned by a string pulled taut by a ghost. It seems if you moved this salt shaker an inch to the left, an alarm would sound not at the police station, but in hell itself. This is the Hillwood Estate. Officially, a museum, the Pearl of Washington. But that is a lie, engraved on the brass plaque at the entrance. Museums are created by curators to tell a story. This place was created by a single will to stop history, to lock a moment of triumph in a crystal display case and throw away the key. These rooms do not hold memories. They carry out an order to be ideal, flawless, eternal. There is no room for life here, with its chaos, its wine stains, and its accidental scratches on the parquet. Life has been banished from here. Only the design remains. Cold, perfect, inhuman. The walls don't just stand. They dictate. They dictate where you walk, where you look, what you feel. They whisper of a wealth that could buy a small country, of a taste honed to the point of cruelty, and of a loneliness so profound it had to be draped in French tapestries and fortified with Russian gold. Who is she? Who is the woman who chose to embalm her own life within the walls of this house? Whose will proved stronger than time, stronger than the United States government, stronger than death itself? To understand this mausoleum, you must understand not the architect, but its sole, eternal client. You must descend into the basement of her soul, where behind industrial freezers for champagne, an icy fear lies hidden, the fear of oblivion. And the main question that seeps from these walls: why does her ghost still check if every portrait is hanging straight? To understand the gilding of Hillwood, you must first descend into the mine where it was extracted. Before the immaculate facade, there was filth and fear. The end of the 19th century. America is the cough of steam engines, the smell of coal and panic, a country poisoned by its own nerves. In this world lived a man named Charles William Post, and he was a broken man, not a captain of industry, not a visionary, just a man whose soul had cracked under the pressure of the age. His empire was born not of inspiration, but of desperation, within the white walls of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. It was a factory for repairing people, where faith in health was mandatory, but the taste of food was not. Here, among people with lifeless eyes, he was served a tasteless brown liquid, a coffee substitute made from grains and molasses, a medicine. He didn't invent a drink. He stole a prescription for salvation. Leaving the sanitarium, he did what his doctor never dared. He turned medicine into a weapon. Charles Post didn't sell a grain beverage. He traded in fear on an industrial scale. His advertisements were not an invitation, but a sentence. Newspaper pages screamed with the voice of an Old Testament prophet. Coffee is poison. Coffee destroys families. Coffee costs you your job. Coffee is the cause of divorce. He found the nation's main artery, its hypochondria, and plunged a syringe of his brown mixture into it. And America paid. It paid millions. And behind him stood a little girl, his daughter, Marjorie. She watched. She saw her father, tormented by demons, build a perfect town for his workers, pay them the highest wages, and simultaneously crush labor unions with the fury of an inquisitor. He built external order to compensate for his internal chaos. He built an empire to lock away his madness. Marjorie absorbed this lesson. The lesson that money is not wealth. Money is control over people, over their fears, over reality itself. She watched the fortune grow and her father fade, how the walls of his palace grew thicker and the silence within grew more deafening. 1914, the empire at its peak and its creator at rock bottom. Chronic pain, a depression that yielded neither to a checkbook nor to an army of doctors. In his office, surrounded by the evidence of his triumph, Charles Post made his final transaction. A bullet in exchange for silence. Marjorie Merriweather Post, at 27, inherited everything. $20 million. And one curse. The original sin of their family. A fortune built on deception and fear. From that day on, her entire life would become one desperate attempt to launder this name, to launder this money, to build walls from it, so thick, so flawless, that no one behind them would ever hear the echo of that gunshot. Hillwood had not yet been laid in the ground, but its foundation was already poured, in blood and shame. An inheritance is a slow-acting poison. It promises freedom, but it imposes shackles. Marjorie Post inherited money, but she craved something else entirely: gravity, history, the right to look at the old blood aristocrats not from below, but as an equal. The boardroom of the Postum Cereal Company, the smell of cigars, old leather, and condescension. She sits at a long table, the only woman in a forest of gray suits. The men who ran her father's empire see her as an accessory to the fortune, a beautiful, well-dressed misunderstanding. They talk about figures, but they look at her pearls. They don't understand that she isn't hearing their voices, but the ticking of a clock. Time is running out. Her time. And she interrupts their polite drone. Her voice is calm, but it carries the chill of industrial freezers. She isn't talking about preservation. She's talking about acquisition. Buy Jell-O. Buy Baker's chocolate. Buy Maxwell House coffee. Absorb their brands, their history, their place in the heart of America. The men exchange glances. It's aggressive. It's risky. It's unthinkable. But she is not asking. She is demanding. And in her eyes, they see not the daughter of their late boss, but his will, cast in a more perfect, more ruthless form. Thus, the General Foods Corporation was born, an empire built on the bones of its competitors. But it wasn't enough. Business was the domain of merchants. She was aiming to be a queen. She didn't just need power, she needed a scepter. She needed an orb. 1937, Moscow, a city frozen not so much by winter as by fear. The air cuts the lungs, smelling of cheap coal, desperation, and boiled cabbage. Through the streets, dressed in furs and arrogance, walk Marjorie and her third husband, the United States ambassador. Around them, a gray crowd, shadows with empty eyes. The country is starving. Industrialization is underway, paid for with grain taken from the peasants, and with gold scraped from icons. She is taken to a commission shop. But this is not a shop. It is a morgue for the aristocracy, a place where a nation is selling off its own soul for tractors and machinery. On dusty shelves, in no particular order, lie treasures torn from cooling hands. The wedding crown of the last Tsarina glimmers dimly next to a copper samovar. 15th century icons are piled up like planks of wood, and amidst this plundered splendor, there they are, Fabergé eggs, toys for a dead dynasty. Marjorie looks at the price tags. The prices are laughable, humiliating. This isn't a sale, it's a disposal of evidence. The Soviet government was erasing the past, and she, the heiress of the serial king, was being offered a chance to buy its fragments. And in that moment, a coronation takes place. Not in a cathedral, but in a grimy Moscow shop. She understood what others did not see. This was not a purchase. It was a transfer of power. The Romanovs had failed to hold their empire. Their blood was absorbed by the soil, and their treasures, here they were, being sold for a pittance. She, the upstart from Michigan, would pick their crown out of the dirt. She would give these orphans a new home. This wasn't shopping. It was a ritual. She wasn't collecting art. She was collecting ghosts to make them serve her. Every chalice she bought, every icon, every diamond-encrusted egg, was a stone in the foundation of her own myth. Hillwood was not conceived as a family nest. It was conceived there, in cold Moscow, as a throne room for these blood-soaked trophies, as a stage upon which the daughter of a coffee substitute salesman would ascend to the throne, surrounded by the legacy of a fallen empire. 1955, Washington. Here, power is a quiet whisper in Georgetown living rooms, not the scream of newspaper headlines. Marjorie Post bought 25 acres of this precious silence, the Hillwood Estate. But she didn't intend to live here. She intended to rule here. It wasn't a construction project that began. It was a war against chaos, against compromise, against reality itself, which is always imperfect. Marjorie, in an elegant dress and a construction helmet, wasn't a client. She was a field marshal on the battlefield. Architects came and went, like ministers at the court of a capricious monarch. To her, their blueprints were mere suggestions, which she tore up with cold composure. She didn't trust their calculations. She trusted only her eye, her intuition, her will. This wall is off by 3 millimeters. Relay it. The workers looked at her as if she were insane. 3 millimeters, 3 specks of dust. But for her, it was a crack in the fabric of the universe. And so, they relayed it, stone by stone, day by day. The house wasn't built of brick and mortar. It was built of her phobias. Behind the luxurious silk curtains, she ordered steel shutters to be installed, as heavy as the doors of a bank vault. Who was she protecting herself from? Burglars? No. She was protecting herself from the world that had killed her father, from a world where revolutions sweep away empires overnight, from a world she could not control. In the basement, where ordinary people store old furniture, she had industrial freezers installed, rows of stainless steel, humming like the engines of an ocean liner. The stock of frozen foods from Birdseye could have fed a regiment for a month. This wasn't thrift. This was a survival strategy. Her house had to withstand any siege, economic, political, even nuclear. Each room was designed not for living, but for a specific trophy. The French drawing room was merely a frame for Sèvres porcelain. The dining room, a showcase for silverware that had seen the guillotine. The house was not a shell for her life. It was a jewelry box for her collection. And she herself was merely the main exhibit, the most precious and the most lonely. This was not a pursuit of beauty. This was an obsession with order. A paranoid desire to create at least one corner of the universe where everything, absolutely everything, obeyed her will, where the color of a rose in the garden harmonized with the upholstery on the sofa, where the temperature in a room was perfect for preserving 18th century tapestries, where there was no room for chance, for error, for the human factor. She had lost 4 marriages. She could not control the hearts of men. She could not make the old aristocracy forget that her money smelled of grain, not land. She could not rewrite the story of her origins. But here, on these 25 acres, she was a god, a small, demanding, all-seeing god of her own man-made paradise. And this paradise was slowly turning into the most exquisite prison ever built by a human for herself. Evening falls. Hillwood ceases to be a home and becomes a stage. The light of hundreds of candles trembles in the crystal of chandeliers, reflects in the blade of a silver knife, and drowns in the depths of rubies. The air is thick, electric. It smells of wax, lilies, and power served on a platter. This is the culmination. The moment for which these walls were built, treasures were acquired, and every gesture was perfected. A dinner party at Hillwood. The guests arrive. Senators whose votes decide the fate of nations. Diplomats whose smiles conceal threats. Financiers who can crash the stock market with a single phone call. They enter this house, and for a moment, even they, the titans of the world, fall silent. They feel more than just wealth. They feel the weight of history, which their hostess wears like a diamond necklace. Marjorie greets them. She is perfection itself. A Dior gown, a flawless smile. Every word is measured. Every movement is rehearsed. She is a queen in her court, and this court has gathered here to witness her triumph. The dinner begins. A senator from Virginia eats dessert from a plate that belonged to Catherine the Great. The plate remembers the touch of the Empress's fingers, and now it serves a descendant of plantation owners whose family, just 100 years ago, owned people, not porcelain. A young congressman from Texas drinks champagne from a glass that Louis XVI might have held, unaware of the guillotine that awaited him. They are not eating food. They are consuming history. They are becoming part of the myth that Marjorie has created for them and for herself. Conversations flow around the table. They discuss the Cold War, a new bill, the latest gossip. But this is just noise. The real game is played in the pauses, in the glances, in who is seated next to whom. Marjorie conducts this orchestra of intrigue with impeccable grace. She strengthens alliances, hints at support, pacifies enemies. Her home is her political capital, her weapon in a world of men. But the camera sees what the guests do not. Behind the perfect smile, a shadow of exhaustion. Her 4th marriage is falling apart. She is the most sought-after hostess in Washington, but soon she will be dining alone again. Behind the sparkle in her guests' eyes, cold calculation. They are not here out of love for her. They are here for her money, her connections, her power. They are part of her collection, as beautiful and as soulless as the porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece. And behind the beauty of the collection itself, a quiet whisper. A whisper of a starving Moscow, of executed aristocrats, of treasures bought for a pittance from the government that destroyed their owners. The guests admire a Fabergé egg, not knowing, or not wanting to know, that its brilliance was paid for with blood. This feast is a feast on bones. On the bones of the Romanovs, on the bones of an old world that Marjorie so desperately tried to recreate and command. The last guest departs. The door closes, and the sound of the lock echoes through the vast, perfect house. Marjorie is left alone. Around her, there is silence, ringing, oppressive, deafening. The halls are full of treasures, but they are empty. The house is full of people, but she is tragically, utterly alone. The golden cage she had so meticulously built her entire life has just snapped shut, and now she is in it, the main and only prisoner. Empires do not collapse from external enemies. They are eroded from within by the most ancient traitor, time. It cannot be controlled. It cannot be bought. It cannot be intimidated. Marjorie Post, the woman who waged a war on imperfection, faced her final, ultimate flaw, her own mortality. The wrinkles on her face were front lines she could no longer hold. The hands that once signed multi-million-dollar checks and rearranged ministers now trembled as they lifted a cup of imperial porcelain. Her final act began, the quietest and the most desperate. She wanders through her house, but it is no longer the triumphant procession of a queen. It is the patrol of a jailer, checking his prison before an execution. She looks at her treasures, but she sees in them not symbols of victory, but orphans. Who will care for them when she is gone? She looks at her children, at her grandchildren. They are flesh of her flesh, but they are different. They belong to a new age, an age of speed, simplicity, and fleetingness. They do not understand the obsession that drove her to build this mausoleum. In their eyes, she sees love, but she does not see the most important thing, her iron will. She knows what will happen after her death. The appraisers will come. They will create catalogs, and her world, her perfect universe, will be sold off, piece by piece, at auction. The Fabergé egg will go to Texas, to an oil tycoon. The Romanov crown will end up in the safe of an Arab sheikh. Her house, her stage, her fortress will be remodeled to suit the tasteless needs of some nouveau riche. Her greatest fear was not death. Her greatest fear was that everything would be forgotten, that her grand design would crumble to dust, that all that would remain of her empire would be a line in the stock market reports and a few scandalous headlines. And then, in the silence of her perfect home, surrounded by the ghosts of czars and her own loneliness, she makes a decision, the only one that seems like a victory to her. If her heirs cannot be the guardians, then the nation itself will be the guardian. She summons her lawyers. Their black suits are like crows, drawn by the scent of the end. She dictates her last will. It is not a document. It is a military order, given from the trench of eternity. Hillwood, with all its land, with its entire collection, with every fork and every napkin. She bequeaths it to the United States of America. It will become a museum, managed by the Smithsonian Institution. She believes this is her triumph, her final, brilliant move. She is writing her name into history not alongside merchants and financiers, but alongside the czars whose treasures she saved. She is turning her home into an eternal monument. She is making her will immortal, protected by the law and prestige of the greatest nation on earth. This is her last and largest bet, a bet against time, against oblivion, against chaos. She hands over the keys to her kingdom to the only hands she believes are stronger than her own. She is sure that she has won, but she does not know that bureaucracy has no soul and no gratitude. 1973. A final breath. Marjorie Post's will breaks free from her weakening body, crystallizing into the legal rigor of her testament. The Queen is dead. Long live her legacy. The lawyers, executors of her final will, hand over the keys to Hillwood to the government with solemn ceremony. This was meant to be a moment of triumph, an act of eternal coronation, a posthumous union between capital and culture. Instead, the humiliation began. It wasn't art historians with fire in their eyes who entered the immaculate halls of Hillwood, but bureaucrats from the Smithsonian Institution. Men in gray, ill-fitting suits. Men for whom the word legacy is just a line item in a budget. They walk through the rooms not with reverence, but with calculators. Their steps aren't resounding, like those of aristocrats, but shuffling, like stockroom clerks. They don't see a Fabergé egg as the treasure of a fallen empire. They see an object requiring round-the-clock security and special climate control. They look at the French tapestries and calculate the cost of their annual cleaning. They walk through 25 acres of perfect gardens and see not a work of landscape art, but exorbitant water bills and the salaries of 80 gardeners. Their reports are not odes to beauty. They are a death sentence written in the language of numbers: heating, electricity, insurance, staff, security, restoration. The $10 million Marjorie left for upkeep seems to them not a generous gift, but a mockery. This sum doesn't cover a tenth of the expenses. Hillwood is not a gift. Hillwood is a black hole that will suck up budget money forever. 3 years. It took the state machine 3 years to digest this gift and issue its verdict. 1976. In the quiet of offices, without any pomp, a decision is made. The government of the United States of America officially refuses the legacy of Marjorie Merriweather Post. Her greatest gift, her bid for immortality, her triumph over time, rejected, returned, like an expensive but unwanted item. The reason: exorbitant costs. A phrase that kills any myth. A phrase that turns a dream into a burden. Workers arrive at Hillwood. They bring wooden crates and packing paper. Methodically, without emotion, they begin to prepare the treasures for removal. Dust covers are draped over the furniture. The sunlight streaming through the windows no longer plays on the gilt, but merely highlights the emptiness. The house, built as a fortress against chaos, sinks into darkness. The dream, forged from iron and fear, turns to dust. It seemed this was the end, the final defeat, proof that even the strongest will cannot stand against the soulless logic of a ledger book. It was over, or so it seemed. The state had said no. The crates were ready. Hillwood, rejected, humiliated, was supposed to die, to dissolve, to become a line item in a Sotheby's auction catalog. But they underestimated her. They thought her will had died with her. They were wrong. Her will was stitched into every line of the testament, in every paragraph, in every legal comma. Shots of the abandoned house. A silence, but not the one from before. Not the silence of perfect order, but the silence of defeat. Motes of dust dance in the sunbeams, settling on the white cloth sarcophagi encasing the furniture. The house held its breath. It waited. And then, something the bureaucrats could not have predicted happened. Marjorie's will proved stronger than their calculators. It wasn't just a wish. It was a structure, a mechanism. Her daughters, bound by an oath to fulfill their mother's final wish, created a private foundation. They found money where the state saw only expenses. They assembled an army of lawyers, art historians, and financiers. The battle for a ghost began. This wasn't a restoration. It was a resurrection. The doors of Hillwood opened once more. The workers took away the crates. The white shrouds were removed from the furniture. The gardeners returned to the gardens. The chandeliers were lit again. But now, everything was different. Hillwood was reborn, but not as a gift to the nation that could be accepted or rejected. It was reborn on her terms. Absolute. Eternal. She had won. She had won after death. She won not because of, but in spite of. In spite of the government. In spite of economic logic. In spite of common sense. Final shot. We are back in the perfect museum, as in the first chapter. The camera glides smoothly through the flawless halls. An imperial porcelain cup sits in its place. Everything in its place. Forever. But now we know the truth. This is not a generous gift to society. This is a private kingdom that never surrendered. It is a monument not to triumph, but to a tragic loneliness so powerful that it materialized in the walls and outlived its creator. This place exists not thanks to the love of descendants, but solely through the power of a control that reached from beyond the grave. Time's verdict has been delivered. This woman's ambitions were so vast, her will so unbending, that she created her own separate reality, a reality that no one but her could control. And now that reality stands here, perfect, cold, eternal, as proof that you can win a war against the world. But the price of this victory is eternal imprisonment in the golden cage of her own perfection. And so, what we have here is not just a story of wealth, but a story of war. The war of one woman against chaos, against time, against the very echo of the gunshot that started it all. Hillwood is not a gift. It is her final command, carved in stone, a command to be perfect forever, proof that a will born of fear can be stronger than an entire government and even death itself. But if you defeat the world by locking it in a perfect display case, don't you become the main exhibit yourself? And what is more terrifying, to disappear without a trace, or to remain forever, a cold, perfect, and utterly lonely ghost in your own paradise? This story has no simple answer, and your perspective is its most valuable part. Share your thoughts in the comments. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, please support our channel. A subscription and a like are the best sign that this conversation should continue.